Thank you very much. I'm going to set that right there because I know the one time I trust the slanted podium, I'm going to end up with a copy in my pocket. Normally when I'm asked to speak, I pour over all the facts and figures and I write out my script. I've just kind of taken some reflection and a few notes because it's really subjective. What's the media's view of the past legislative session? But by the way, I got a quick trivia question here. In 2004, can you name the 4 candidates for lieutenant governor in our state?
How about 3? I can name 3. I can't remember myself.
2 of the 4 are here. Bruce Hillis, who I got to know on the campaign trail in 2004, was the Constitution Party's nominee for lieutenant governor. Of course, Peter Kinder won that race. Becky Cook was the other candidate, and then on the Libertarian ticket was some guy named Mike Ferguson. So those were the 4 candidates, but it was really good to see Bruce again. He kind of surprised me because I hadn't seen him in quite a while. One of the questions that I had to ask myself when I got this invitation was, what will the 2012 legislative session be remembered for? And I poured over it, and I poured over it, and I came to the conclusion, not much. Not a whole lot. From a media perspective, my own, and obviously, you know, with 10 different media people, you'll get 10 different opinions. But I saw plenty of politics involved. I saw plenty of positioning in this election year involved. I saw a lot of public relations involved, but I didn't see a lot of actual policy work. That's not to detract from the few things that did get done that needed to be done, but I didn't see a huge focus on that. But still, there is room, of course, to critique our lawmakers, as there should be. That's part of the role of the media. It's part of the role of the public. There's also room to critique the media itself in our coverage of the lawmakers, and I'll do just a little bit of that as well at the end. But when it comes to politics, obviously it's an election year. The Republican Party in solid control of the House and the Senate, maybe more so than they really want in an election year, because when they blame the governor for everything that goes wrong, they're forgetting that when it comes to the policies that are set, they have overwhelming majorities. They set the policies. So as much as they want to blame the governor can only deal with what he's handed. I also got a sense that it was a matter from the Republicans of don't rock the boat too much when momentum is clearly on your side. I believe that this state is trending more conservative. I really do. I believe that this state is. And so you don't want to alienate your independent swing voters. Whereas last session, there were a lot of hot topics that were just knockdown, drag-out brawls. This year we didn't have as much of that. An example, our highway system is crumbling. We have a big problem on our hands. But the minute somebody started talking about anything that would raise revenue, which is code word for raise taxes, we don't want to talk about that. Toll road, user fees, we don't want to talk about it. Now, I'm not saying whether I agree or disagree with it, but I'm saying is that the highway system is crucial enough that it should be talked about sooner rather than later, and the legislature punted on it. And the part of the reason is because it's an election year. Who wants to go out to the county fair when you're running for re-election and have to answer the question, why did you just put a toll road that I've got to pay an extra however much to go see grandma or to go to the Royals game or the Cardinals game? Is it going to a Royals game punishment enough? Cardinals not so much, but the bottom line is it's a serious issue that needs serious discussion, and we didn't really see a lot of it this year. We got a commission to study it, which means once we're safe in our re-election, then we'll deal with it then. You know, is there a free market solution? Yeah, I believe that there is, but we didn't get that in the forefront to give Amy Bluen from the budget project a chance to swing at it like a piñata. But the bottom line is it needs to be discussed sooner rather than later, and we could be another year behind. So that's some politics that was involved. Positioning. There were some House Republicans versus Senate Republican skirmishes. Most of the positioning was over which candidates and which potential candidates for statewide office could really establish themselves as the most conservative as we head into an election year. We got a lot of that positioning. A lot of talk of economic development, but did you notice it wasn't really as aggressive this year when it comes to large-scale projects? For instance, the Aerotropolis plan last year, where you had clear debate and you had something dominating the headlines. That didn't come around as much this year. Why? Well, that's a little bit of a risk for those running for re-election or those who want to run for higher office maybe. So we heard a lot of lip service about economic development, but when it came to actually doing something, whatever it is that you want done, not a lot of action, not a lot of execution on it. It's better to be the one who fought the good fight, stuck by your principles in word, but then went ahead and let it die out and say, we'll get to it next year. Just re-elect me so we can do it next year. Why? Well, everybody loves to bring home the bacon when it comes to tax credits, tax incentives, state money, but there is a growing and continuing push for tax credit reform and an overall challenge to the kind of conventional thinking in the state when it comes to the tax credit process. A large part because of the Show Me Institute. You all have had a very good media strategy, and the fact of the matter is that the right questions are being raised to more and more people, and all of a sudden you've got the media's attention. Those are questions being raised that are making some lawmakers uncomfortable. So I think that's one of the changes in the last couple of years I've seen in the legislature, is they are more susceptible to that kind of pressure. So the Show Me Institute has been very effective in that particular realm and that particular topic. Also, why did we not see more action? Well, we had the Mamtech debacle. We think of it here locally as kind of a local story because it's Moberly, but that really sent more shockwaves through the legislature, for the reason being they don't want to be the next local lawmakers on the hook for a 10, 15, 20, $100 million incentive project that's left boarded up. They saw what happened in the scrambling in Moberly, and they don't want to be the next ones to have their name hung on that. So they want some safety. The local losses may be minimal. They're still sorting that out. There's no question. The state says the incentives were not paid out because the jobs were not created. That's probably true. They were definitely offered. But the what if wake-up call wasn't just heard in Moberly. That was heard in Jefferson City, and that was heard in every chamber of commerce and every city council and every board of aldermen across the state. And a lot of the issues that frankly have been raised by the Show Me Institute are now coming to fruition, where people are saying, whoa, you mean there is risk to these things? We can't just promise all sorts of money. We can't just give it away and assume it's always going to work. There's a risk to this. Well, yeah. And now we saw. And then we go into the little bit of investigative work that was done, and that's going to be another critique of the media here in a little bit. There wasn't a whole lot of investigative work this year. The little bit of investigative work shows that there was not a lot of screening of who qualified for that money, for that tax credit, for those incentives. So the legislature, they did appoint a commission to look into it, so we can all rest assured that that was fixed. But another hot potato that in previous years they may have grabbed onto and somebody would have led the charge, they're going to wait another year. More positioning. And of course, I'm talking a lot about Republicans. I don't mean to leave out the Democrats, but let's be really honest. There aren't enough of them in the legislature right now to have a lot of leverage. They just can't call any shots. So when it comes to positioning, what the media was essentially doing is saying, well, we've got a Republican that's really going to make the decision, but we need the other side of the story. So what we did is we called Mike Talboy out of Kansas City, since he was the minority leader, and we got his soundbite, which is basically Representative Talboy talking about Republicans kind of like a color commentator would talk about a ball game. I mean, he's not really affecting the game, but he does make a big deal out of the other team's errors, and he did, of course, have some material to work with this year. Public relations. There was a lot of public relations. I got to tell you, I I got more press and media releases this year than I remember in a long, long time. A lot of press release journalism happening around the state. There's a lot of news stories I saw in the newspaper, a lot of news items I heard even on television, on radio, that were basically rewritten press releases. That's a problem. Press releases serve a great purpose, don't get me wrong, but they should be the lead to a story. And if the media is going to cover the legislature, and the legislature is going to be held accountable by the media and by the people, somebody has to do more than rearrange what a marketing specialist in the Department of Economic Development wrote. And that's why we need an independent media. And I think we're getting there again. I'll go into that in a few minutes. But because of the cutbacks in news media from local and statewide sources, he who writes the press release often dictated the terms of the story. He who writes the press release often shaped what was presented as fact to the people of the state. I have a problem with that. I don't have the money to fix it, but I have a problem with it. And that's one of the problems with the legislature being able to get away with some of the things they get away with, is because of the cutbacks in journalism and the media. So my critique is as much with my media brethren as it is with our legislative critters in Jefferson City. Overall, though, the media just ate up those press releases, as well. Sometimes it's just a fact that comes out. I think the Department of Natural Resources saying, the crop of this type of fish looks really good this year. Fine. But when it comes down to economic development, Department of Economic Development, or the Office of Administration using a press release to make a case for one side, that needs to be questioned more. And we had a lack of that this year. Governor Nixon is not the most accessible public official for the media. He does okay in some interviews, but he's really kind of kept away from being readily available. At one point on my talk show, and then later on the news talk show on the Eagle, I asked for interviews no fewer than 6 times with his staff, to the point where after the last time I was turned down, I said, okay, talked to his office, I said, okay, the governor has a standing invitation. He can call me 2 minutes before a show, and I will put him on the air. That never happened. And I thought, well, maybe he just doesn't like the Eagle because it had a reputation as a conservative station, but no, he just doesn't do, frankly, live media anywhere. He'll do press conferences when he's doing an event, and he's better in those circumstances, and his press people are very good at what they do. But he's not easy to get a hold of for one-on-one interviews. The public relations side comes from the governor's office when he shaped a debate over, for instance, you remember the controversy over services for blind Missourians. What was it, $27 million or something like that out of a $2 billion budget. So it's a fraction, but it also serves something like 1,800 people, 2,000 people, something like that. The media took it as a soap opera drama. Why? Because that's what the press release said. The big bad mean Republicans are trying to cut off services for blind Missourians. How could you be so cruel? Why wasn't more media saying, wait a minute, how many millions of dollars for how many thousands of people? Isn't there a better way to get a return on that money? Can't the people who need those services be provided for less taxpayer money? Maybe they can't. I have a little trouble believing that, but maybe they can't. But that wasn't what the issue was in the media. And that's as much a failure of the media as it is of the lawmakers. But it was a great public relations tool for not just the governor, but also for the Democrats, who I think won that round in the media. Now, what the governor, I think, did very well when it comes to public relations was his follow-up on the disasters of 2011. I don't think there's a lot of controversy over his performance as governor when the floods hit, when the tornadoes hit. St. Louis and Sedalia and Joplin, and then the flooding all through the river. Not a lot of controversy there. You know, he stuck to the playbook. He got the services arranged that needed to be arranged. He was very smart from a public relations perspective to go right back to those locations and do his follow-ups. And I don't think there's necessarily anything wrong with that. But those were the times the governor was available to the media. Very controlled situations. Now, my staff would try to ask other questions. We'd get it on occasion. But what we found often is after a couple of unrelated questions, there was a guy in a suit in the back going, "Okay, one more question, time to go, we got to get on the road." And he was whisked out. Now, I don't think the governor is necessarily afraid of questions, but they're very careful on how it's framed, and I don't think the media has been as aggressive as it should have been with the administration and with the legislature. Overall, I do, though, think that the left and the Democratic Party was more timid this year. And this goes back to that public relations that we saw. A lot of public relations is saying what you think needs to be said to win or gain mileage. Another part is keeping your mouth shut when what you have to say is going to hurt you. And I think we saw that this year on the left and the legislature in particular. The liberal lawmakers, they understand that outside of the big metropolitan areas and in university towns, that their appeal is very limited outside of those areas right now, statewide. Jolie Justice, Jason Holzman, Jeanette Mott Oxford, many of these lawmakers, Sarah Lampy, they are in very, very liberal districts. But when they get outside of those districts, they understand. I mean, I've known Jolie Justice for years. Very, very smart lady. I don't think we agree on a thing, but it's made for some very great coffee conversations, especially with her and with Jason Holzman. But they understand that from a public relations perspective, their message does not have widespread appeal in the state. It just doesn't right now. Very widespread appeal in parts of their community, but not statewide. So public relations has been a great deal of them stepping back and not going to the media, not getting on statewide news. And that was smart. Now, the legislative leaders, Democratic Party, we should have been pursuing them more aggressively to get those comments. The same way that we will with the conservatives, even the most outspoken conservatives. I mean, I don't think Brian Nieves has ever met a camera or microphone that he doesn't like. And he makes the establishment cringe sometimes, but a lot of times he's saying what everybody else is thinking. So that's part of the public relations. Not a lot of policy. Let me tell you what I mean by that. The most passionate of those on the right and the most passionate of those on the left, which sometimes the media mislabels as extremists on both sides. And whether it's a liberal or conservative, I kind of get irritated when I hear, a media pundit, because people in my line of work sometimes are more ego-driven than they are passionate about what the media should be doing. Well, Jason Crowell and Brian Nieves are extremists. Just extreme right wing. Sarah Lampy, left wing. Well, I think they represent the mainstream of their parties more than what most people will admit. I think they do. So the labels don't make a whole lot of sense to me. But they're still standing up on both sides for what they want. There were opportunities for some big changes in policy this year. And I'm not saying whether I agree or disagree with them. Jane Cunningham brought up teacher tenure reform. That needs to be addressed. How do we know that? The dollars don't add up. The money doesn't add up. The performance of the public schools doesn't add up right now. The whole thing needs to be looked at. Now, whether she had the right or the wrong answer, I'll leave that up to you to decide. But that's a policy that should have been discussed in more length, in more depth. And it wasn't. Why? It's an election year. Who wants to be the person who is framed in the media because they read a press release that is the person who is wanting to burn your kid's school down, which is how this gets presented when people don't do their job in the media. Tax incentives and the tax credit process, tax credit caps, that entire overhaul is something we've been talking about as a state for 2 or 3 years now at least. Senator Chuck Ferguson made the strongest case for it last year. He didn't win, but he got a lot of people thinking about it. And this was the opportunity for somebody to do something about it. But once again, if you get to go home in an election year and say, look, $10,000 in tax credits for the old historic post office here in small town Missouri. You don't want to be the one to vote against that. You'll vote against it next year when you give people 2 years to forget about it. But that's the positioning in the public relations. So we didn't see that. The Missouri Budget Project, Chris Kelly brought up the possibility of an internet sales tax. Okay, I certainly made my views on that known when I had the talk show, but it is a legitimate policy discussion. Whether we like the idea or whether we don't, it's a legitimate policy discussion. It didn't get discussed in much depth because of the politics and the positioning and the public relations. The consumption retail tax versus the income tax idea, whether it's the fair tax or the other idea, the concept deserves debate and discussion. The legislature would not touch it. The referendum process had to touch it. Then ultimately a judge touched it with, the stomp of a foot. But that's a policy discussion that should be happening in the legislature. Why are so many citizens going to the referendum process? Why are so many special interest groups going to the referendum process? Pardon me. It's because in years like this, the legislators get more timid. They play it safe. They go into defense mode. They go into don't offend someone mode. And they say, we'll tackle it next year. Well, we're talking hundreds of millions or billions of dollars of impact on our economy. We can't punt every other year. Now, you may make a decision I don't like. I'm still going to cover it the same way. But we can't be so afraid of how the media is going to frame you that you don't make a decision. If you're afraid of what that report's going to be on the 6 o'clock news and that changes how your vote's going to be, maybe you should reconsider running for public office. Accountability is part of being in public office. And I think we saw some people take a step back from that. We saw some other people embrace it full force. And I respect that aspect, whether they're a Republican or a Democrat, but we saw a lot of other people step back from it. I mentioned the I-70 toll roads, the education funding formula. That's been discussion as long as I remember when I was covering news in the state. Somebody brings up every year, this funding formula maybe needs to be tweaked, and then everybody else in caucus goes, shh, stop. You're going to make somebody mad. Well, a workforce that has more unskilled workers than we need and not enough skilled workers to fill the jobs that we have open in a recession makes me mad. So whether the Democrats have the right idea, whether the Republicans have the right idea, the ideas need to be debated more fully, and we just didn't see that this year. So a lot more policy got done last year as opposed to this year from this media person's viewpoint. And the Republican Party, which could basically do mostly whatever it wanted, really drew back. They really did. I think that they went into that kind of the extra defense mode. If you're a baseball fan, they played deep. They played double play depth. If you're a soccer fan, they put the extra defender back. Whatever sports analogy you want to use, they played it safer because this is an election year. Democrats, I'm a little surprised they weren't more aggressive. What on earth do they have to lose right now? I mean, from the governor's race on down, what do they have to lose? I'm a little surprised that they weren't more aggressive. Governor Nixon is likely to be reelected. Republicans were not successful. I mean, I think they've fielded two good guys. One of them I like in particular, but they're not being funded to the level that's going to take to challenge the governor. Lieutenant governor's race, I think that the Republicans are probably going to keep that seat. May not be with the same person. Don't kid yourself. There's a very possible upset in that primary. I do think that the Republicans are going to pick up the Secretary of State's race, if I had to do a prediction. I think Shane Scholler will probably be that guy. I think the Democrats are going to hold on to the state treasurer's office. And if I were a gambler, which I'm not, but if I were right now, I would say that the Democrats are going to hold on to the Attorney General's office. But if there were to be the surprise of the year, that's the race where it could be. Never count out Ed Martin. I've known him for years. Nobody is going to outwork Ed Martin. And I don't say that just because he's a personal friend. Nobody is going to outwork Ed Martin. That's for sure. So, what did the legislature do? Let's give them some credit. They did pass the budget without tax increases, so we give them credit for that. They did their job. There's still some positioning there. Parts of that budget assume some very hopeful revenues based on gambling. That's one of the ways they balanced the budget over the next fiscal year. Lottery, boats, the education funding and the veterans funding. Some of that's based on increases in revenues from gambling that I don't know where they came up with them. I just have no idea. But that's how they balance the budget. So don't be surprised if Governor Nixon is in a position to do another round of withholdings sometime in the next fiscal year. Don't be surprised if that happens after the election as well. But that's what happens when the legislature needs to say they balance the budget, but they don't have the money, and they don't want to make the deep cuts that are dictated by the economy. And so they did increase spending. That's the bottom line, is the Republican legislature increased spending this year. And they said it was balanced because they are assuming these additional revenues. Who saw in-depth reporting on that in the media this year? Yeah, I didn't think so. I remember one news organization putting that on the print and on the radio, and that was Missouri News Horizon. Because we've partnered with new media around the state, and one of the partners we have is the Missouri Journal. And Brian Hook got in, questioned the numbers, got a hold of the folks at the budget office, Linda Lubring, and he got real answers, which we were able to put on the air. We put it on the air, through our actuality service. We put it on our print service, which is run in newspapers all over the state. Maybe some others question those things, but for the most part, they just took the press releases and rewrote them. They did get something started at the Callaway nuclear site. Obviously the federal government, and there was going to potentially be some roadblocks to building the second nuclear reactor. So the smaller reactors over the course of several years, at least they got that started. So give them credit on that, and that was very bipartisan from what I could see. And let me wrap up with kind of a media critique. Media likes to say things like, well, the budget's boring, it's not sexy enough, people aren't going to listen, and I don't believe it if you write the story or you present the story in a way that says, this is how it affects you. This is what it means, parents, to your child's education. Whether you want to be in public school or whether the policy means that you have easier access to a private school if you homeschool. This is what it means for those of you who are driving on highways that have potholes in them. If we present that as a media saying this is what it means to you, I believe people care. I believe people are frustrated because the media doesn't do its job fully. But we all heard about Southeast Missouri State getting an extra $2 million and the slap fight between Jason Crowell and Stephen Tilley. That's good radio. That's good drama. Yeah, was it a legitimate debate? Probably for that local thing, but it was part of an overall university education funding. How about the Rush Limbaugh bust? We all heard about that. Now, whether you agree or disagree with Rush Limbaugh, my opinion is that Rush Limbaugh deserves to be in the Hall of Fame as Missourians. I would think even Democrats would realize the impact he has had on culture, the impact he has had on mass media, the impact he has had, frankly, on the political debate. I think he deserves to be there. I do think the way the Speaker of the House handled it was atrocious. To say the People's House, the People's Hall of Famous Missourians, we're locking the doors and putting armed highway patrol around, and we're not allowing the media in, I thought was a slap in the face to the public. I understand that they were worried about some protesters. Protesting's part of the political process. So, Stephen Tilley is a friend, but I told my staff, take him to the cleaners. He's earned it. That is not the way we should be doing any sort of business. The Democrats responded by positioning in public relations. The woman-hating Rush Limbaugh, et cetera, he should never be allowed in, whatever. Liberal activist Bob Barker's in, that's okay. Conservative activist Rush Limbaugh's in, no. Who were they appealing to? Well, they were appealing to the primary voters and their donor base. And Republicans do the same thing. But we heard more about the Rush Limbaugh saga than we did about the budget, than we did about the battle over healthcare exchanges in this state. And that impacts each and every person in this state. But we didn't have a lot of activity on that. We have a lack of state house coverage. We have a lack of state government news coverage. Outlets that used to all have offices in the state. I mean, how many of you remember a time when you could turn on KNBC in St. Louis or KSDK in St. Louis, or in St. Louis, KNBC in Kansas City? Any of those, and they would go to their Jefferson City Capitol Bureau. Remember that? I do. You don't have that now. Governing Magazine did a 4 or 5 page article probably 4 years ago, 4 or 5 years ago. Matter of fact, it was over 4 years ago. I was still on the city council in Grandview when the story came out about the lack of state house coverage. It costs too much. They're cutting back, but I don't think that reflects a lack of demand. When it comes to the market, I think there is still a heavy demand for state house coverage, for state government news coverage. And that's where new media has come in. That's where, for instance, Missouri News Horizon, that I'm now the director of, comes in. We are filling that void for state house news coverage. We are syndicating that coverage. So we have dozens of radio stations that use our services, dozens of newspapers, and we have several television stations that can't afford the coverage themselves, so they contract out with us. We're a nonprofit, and we're providing that coverage. Now, the good news is that's the market working. There's a void in the supply. There's still a demand. Somebody comes up with a new business model, and that's what we've done. That's the good thing. The bad news is that's also potential for abuse if the wrong people are in control of that. We have too few media voices. I got in trouble with my boss because he commented that our main competition in this area was getting a lot better since we've gotten better. And I went, good. It's like, no, that's bad. Oh, right, bad. Sorry, competition. But it is good. It's good that our competition is getting better. It forces us to get better. It also holds us accountable. That's good. It's also, and the bottom line is we are a public service. We're a nonprofit. If we don't deliver what you need and what you want, we will go out of business, and that's the way it should be. So if our competition gets better, meets the demand better than we do, I've got two choices. I can get better and meet the need better than the other guy, or I can find another line of work. That's the free market, and I'm okay with that. New media. It's also filling that void. Now, with new media, there's also less accountability. That's part of the free market right now. One of the most powerful media voices in Kansas City right now is a guy named Tony Botello. Anybody ever heard of him? You ever heard of Tony's Kansas City blog? Tony runs this blog. And Tony absolutely makes no bones about he's not a journalist. He's opinion driven, but he gets stories that other people don't get. He has no accountability. That's the market right now. Blogs, no accountability. That's why it's important that when you fill a void, in this case with the media, that you're setting yourself up to be accountable. I think that is what's going to, for lack of a better term, solidify your customer base. If you know you can trust me, then I've got a better market position. Blogs come and go, but I'm always in competition with them. It may be a totally different set of blogs tomorrow, but I'm still in competition with them. So I need to do the better job. Fred?
When you say no accountability, you mean there's no editor standing over that guy to challenge his points and things like that?
No.
Because sometimes I think that's the problem too. The problem that you have editors,
Right.
So ideologically driven that even if you had a fair story out there, often gets slanted one way or the other.
Right.
So you don't have accountability there either. I think accountability is the guy that goes down and pays for the newspaper or whatever, the service. And if you, that's where the accountability should be in the marketplace.
Yeah.
I would like it if we had neutral editors, but we never really have had that.
Right. Well, and that's one of the things, I mean, those of you who listen to my talk show know I'm a conservative guy. And I would not, I'm not going to sit here and say, well, I'm a journalist now, I don't have opinions. I've got opinions. But I'm in a role that says I'm going to provide the facts. And if you think that my bias is coming through, you need to call me on it. You need to go to the people that sponsor our news and say, Mike's not giving me fair news. Put that economic pressure on me. I've hired one of the best known new media blogger / website independent journalist and gave him his first pro gig named Eli Yoakley. I hired the guy about 3 weeks ago. So he's got his shot, and I told him, I said, you are coming to the news coverage from a different angle than I probably would in my personal life. I don't want to see your bias in the story. You're not doing your blog anymore. You're now a professional, and this is how it needs to be. And so far, that's exactly what we've gotten out of it. Mitch.
Well, I just wanted to, what Fred said, here locally, there is a role to be played by blogs. I know you're not saying that, but
Right.
To really extend what he was saying, it actually goes completely the other way. That I'll say it respectfully, but I'll say it nonetheless. The EEZ issue here in town, we have not gotten fair coverage.
I agree.
And the one place we have, say what you will about him, is Mike Martin's blog.
I think Mike Martin's done a great job.
He has, and he's not mainstream.
Right.
He gets poo-pooed by the media, by the newspapers, and he has given far more to the public than. So it goes.
I tried to get Mike to be a regular on my talk show, and he wouldn't do it. Yeah, I did. I tried several times. But that's that supply and demand in the marketplace. When there is a void of media delivering impartial, fact-based news that people can rely on, that void is filled somewhere. And the blogs are filling a lot of it. Now, the blogs are also, again, with a lack of accountability, some are good, some are bad. That's the market. The good ones will survive. The bad ones will either find a niche or they'll go away. But yeah, and Tony's Kansas City is, one of the reasons Mark Funkhauser is not the mayor of Kansas City today is because of that blog. And he landed a pretty good gig in Washington, D.C. after that. But Tony's Kansas City have got that. I agree. The Heartbeat does a great job, I think. I looked for leads on stories. But that's the difference in media. What I would see there, or I'd see something on John Combest, or I would see something in other media, I would say, wow, that's a good story. I better call the source and confirm everything and start asking questions that they're not asking. We don't have enough of that right now, and that's why the legislature, I think, was allowed to be timid this year, because they weren't pressed in large part by an independent media, because we don't have as much of an independent media as we should. That's a good question. What else? Yes.
I'm intrigued by the idea that there could be a conservative party in Missouri fulfilling the same role that it fills in New York State.
Oh yeah.
Whereas they won't necessarily field their own candidates, but they will if there is not a conservative enough, or a straight enough, or an honest enough candidate from either party. oftentimes they will support a Republican. But beyond the electoral issues, they influence the discussion. It would be harder for a journalist to ignore them.
Right.
And I wonder if you think that that might not be a good thing, because what's happening is that the larger issues, the structural problems, are not being addressed. And we're looking at the
When you look at third parties, there's a big difference between New York and the Show Me State. In New York, a conservative Republican can run on more than one ballot line. So, for instance, let's say that Fred here is running for state representative in New York. He could get the Republican nomination. He could also get the Conservative Party nomination. And you could vote for Fred under the Conservative Party nomination if you didn't like the Republicans, but you like Fred. And all those votes get added up in New York. And that's one of the ways that they really influence the debate, because the Republican Party does not want them putting a conservative on. They want their nominee on that party ticket, and that is a little bit of accountability. It's interesting in the Show Me State, and this is somebody who spent many years as a member of a third party, and I'm not anymore, that the third parties have one of the easiest ballot access systems in the country here, but still consistently fail to make any amount of difference in our state. And I would argue that, I don't know, how many votes did you have in 04? I had about 54,000. I think you were close. Yeah, I mean, between us, we had almost 100,000 votes between Bruce and I traveled 5,000 miles. I spoke at I don't know how many events. People say it's not fair. The media isn't covering third parties. Well, the third parties aren't making themselves relevant. It's not my job as a media person to say this candidate who's got $42.22 raised so far and is campaigning on a Facebook site gets the same coverage as somebody who commands audiences of 500 people, who is really going to be the person who has a chance to make the difference. Now, if a third-party person comes in and makes themselves relevant, it is my job to cover them. I just haven't seen it in the state in a while. Not since Bill Johnson in 96 or whatever, 92, whatever it was that he ran.
They're candidates. They're not representative of a sound party. They don't have a base behind them.
Right. They don't have a base.
They're running as individuals. That's why you two were competing, which makes no sense to me.
Yeah, because Bruce, I'm not sure there's a whole lot we disagree on. Bruce and I.
Well, you ran, see, I walked.
Yeah, it is,
What else would change the atmosphere in Jeff? What would help clean up that mess?
Clean up the mess just overall with them being too timid and not.
More to it than that, but I mean that's a symptom. That's a huge symptom of the problem.
As unpopular as it may be, I think the state should reconsider, or at least consider extending out the term limits. What we found about 4 years ago is we had a lot of brain drain. We had a lot of people that couldn't run again that were pretty good. Who would not like to see Alan Isett still chairing the budget committee right now? Now, I think Sylvie's done a good job, but just the time, Alan told me this. He said, just the time I got to where I really understood every nook and cranny, I couldn't run for anything anymore.
Either they're understanding it, or sometimes you get to educate somebody.
Well, yeah, exactly.
On the issues, and then they leave.
Right. So, we chose term limits. That's what we've chosen to do. I think maybe instead of 4 years or 4 terms in the House and 2 in the Senate, maybe they ought to look at adding a couple terms. I mean, I'm all for fresh blood in there. I still think the voters are very capable of turning people out when they don't do a good job. If you don't believe me, ask Mr. Skelton right now. Where is he? Well, he had to move his stuff to make room for Vicky Hartzler. Voters don't always have a great record of doing it, but voters can do it. As far as the accountability, I don't know if third parties, I think I'm like a lot of people who say, yeah, we'd love to have a strong third party come in and really change things. I don't think the culture in the state right now lends itself to that. I think people who are constitutional conservatives, fiscal conservatives, are far better off doing what Fred's doing right now, and Caleb's doing right now, which is running for office in the Republican Party, saying we're going to pull you this direction, whether you like it or not. This is what we're going to do. Now, the Republican Party is about to nominate Mitt Romney for president, so obviously they learned their lesson from 2008. But those are the things where the marketplace of voters can be the ultimate accountability if we let it. Are there problems with the system? Absolutely, there are problems with the system. Is the media part of it? Yep. I'm sure I've been guilty of it sometimes myself. So it comes down to, are we willing to be accountable and hold ourselves accountable, correct our mistakes? I remember when I would do a newscast or the talk show, if I screwed something up on the air, which happens from time to time, one of the things I got in trouble with our consultant was I would go back and correct it in the same time block that I made the mistake. So if I messed up something at 5:23 and got a fact wrong, and I found out, the next day I would say, by the way, yesterday I said this, here's the actual story, I apologize for the error. Newspapers, I would love to see them do that. That they do correct their mistakes almost every day in a little tiny box that's on page 14Z in a little corner surrounded by classified ads somewhere. Okay, maybe not that bad, but that's how they do it. I was told, no, don't be telling people that you made mistakes, you'll reduce your credibility. I don't know about anybody else, but I know when I walked around town, I had people comment saying, I really appreciated that you admitted that you messed up and changed it. I think people trusted me more when I said, hey, I messed up, and I did it at the time when the same audience that heard me made the mistake heard me give the correction. And it was a little humbling to do it. Media is an ego-driven business sometimes. I don't like saying I made mistakes, but I think I've got a responsibility to it, and I think that served my audience better to do that. And I think the market reacted.
Is it part of the Missouri News Horizon's responsibility to correct faulty reporting?
Yes.
One-sided? Call the AP and Jeff on.
Oh, no, it's not. No, because we compete with the AP. It's our job. I mean, if we make a mistake, it's absolutely our responsibility to correct it. If the AP makes a mistake, if MissouriNet makes a mistake, if a local makes a mistake, it's not our job. Now, there have been times where we have said, despite reports to A, we've confirmed that B. But it's not our job to take swings at the AP. It's up to them to correct it. If they don't, they simply lose the support. They should lose the support of the audience and the market. But we don't. It's not the same kind of competition as, say, a political campaign or Kmart versus Walmart or Target.
If a blogger takes issue with an AP story,
sure,
Tribune story, or
yeah,
Post-Dispatch editorial, would that fall within your purview?
I don't understand the question. I'm sorry.
If say I respond to an editorial in the St. Louis Post-Dispatch,
right,
pointing out certain things that they didn't point out, is that a story? Is that something that you would report?
Because you've got opinion on opinion at that point. We generally don't respond to or report on opinion, because commentary is commentary, opinion is opinion, and that's going to be different than the news. Now, I mean, obviously, everything is a little bit relative. If the governor pens a commentary saying, I think that we need to drain the Missouri River, we're going to cover that. But as far as one opinion versus another, no. We'll cover that when the candidates are running. But no, just as far as a news media outlet, a conservative paper versus a liberal paper, we're not going to cover it. Probably we're going to let the opinion writers try to win people over on their own on that.
Mike, I know you could go on, and I know by my interpretation of the market, people would continue to listen for another hour or two. But we've only got an hour in here.
Yeah.
So thanks to Mike for